Hi, Kate. Thanks for joining me to talk a bit about how to write a great statement of advice today. But before diving right down into that topic, I thought it would be really nice if maybe we could just get to know you a little bit better. You've been around the financial planning industry for many years now. Could you tell us a little bit about the work that you do and a bit about who you are?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Joel. I guess you are right. I've been around the industry now for, about 25 years. And in that time, I've worked in a lot of big corporate, but in the last decade, I think about 12 years ago, I started up my first paraplanning business. I left Macquarie as a BDM and decided that there was a great niche market opportunity to get more involved with advice again. So in that time, I've been doing a couple of iterations of paraplanning businesses as well as consulting. I spent in my corporate years quite a bit of time doing software consulting in advice here and in the UK. So that's what I've been doing more recently.
Yeah. How are you feeling about the industry right now? So how are you feeling about the financial planning industry at this particular point?
Yeah, good question. I guess there's a lot going on in our environment at the moment, not just with financial planning, but certainly the industry is transforming. And for someone like myself, who I think provides more of that support around the advice, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think change always brings great opportunity to improve and develop. And that's what I've been trying to get more involved in since FASIA, really.
Question without notice. So can you tell me a little bit about some of the differences that you're seeing or you have experienced between the industry here in Australia and the UK? So you said you spent some time in the UK doing some software consulting.
Yeah.
What were some of the parallels and some of the differences between advisors and advice businesses in the UK versus Australia?
Yeah, well, there are quite a few differences. I know that there's many saying that we're really following the path of the UK more recently with the changes that are going on. There's some different things structurally though, and when I was there, it was quite some time ago. They had more of that product tied structure, so we didn't have quite the same structure. And my consulting initially, when I went over there, was literally the CEO that I'd been working for at Boss Software asked me to look at the UK market and how different it was and whether it was viable to look at taking the software product to market there. And we decided that there were so many differences structurally that it would take a pretty significant capital investment to do so. So look, there's certainly synergies in advice globally, but some great market differences there, I think.
Yeah, interesting. My experience of talking to advisors in the UK over the last little while has been really different sort of adoption of technology as well, and sort of the way that they adopt technology seems to be a bit different, more fragmented in some ways. Has that been your experience as well? Is there a difference between how UK-based advisors use technology in their advice businesses versus those in Australia?
There is, and this is one of the things that came up when I did my research over there as a consultant, is that we've come from a very compliance-driven approach to advice in Australia, whereas it seemed to me that in the UK, they came from more of a sales and marketing stance, particularly in the written form. So when you're looking at the statement of advice that we have compared to what they have, theirs really came across as a marketing document.
Yeah, right.
Too. You certainly want it to be a document that the clients want to read, but we still have to be making sure that we're meeting the legal requirements.
Cool. So changing gears for a second, you're obviously looking at a lot of kind of different technologies at the moment. I know from my conversations with you that you've sort of mentioned a few that you're kind of particularly excited about. Can you maybe share with the broader audience here, what are some of those things that you look at and some of those projects that you might be working on where you've kind of come across something which is a little bit exciting and a little bit different. Are there any of those sorts of things that you can share?
Yeah, I think so. I'm certainly sure the software providers won't mind us talking
No,
about
free
them.
plugs are always welcome.
Yeah, I guess one of the challenges that we find here in Australia is that it's relatively a small market, and trying to get the development dollar into the software companies for our market has always been a challenge. So we don't necessarily see a lot of competition in that space where the software can do everything, like an
Yeah,
Xplan, for example.
yeah,
That's what has brought many companies undone historically in Australia, is trying to be everything in the financial planning process. So what I'm excited about at the moment is that we're seeing providers come into the software space that are focusing on a particular part of the advice process. Um, some of them are starting to branch out, and if I use the example of Astute Will, that initial engagement piece that they do with clients, the interactivity that they have with their calculators is fantastic. You know, it's really visual and much more engaging than we've seen in the past.
yeah,
But that doesn't mean that they're working towards getting statement of advice output, but they're not trying to be everything in every stage of that process. And I guess that's where Nod sits as well. One of the difficulties with that, though, is then from an advisor practice point of view, how do they bring all that together to run their business, and
yeah,
how do they connect it? From a tech point of view, we're seeing some great development with Zapier and
yeah,
all of these things that allow you to connect different software together. But I think IntelliFlow, who we've seen at the AFA conference last year, would be an exciting addition to our market, because it gives that ability to wrap a CRM or that type of thing around some of these great individual providers.
yeah.
So the advice practices don't have to just go with one.
Well, let's talk about the statement of advice then, because I think one thing I'm really keen to do here is to really speak to the document creators out there. I think a lot of the time we get, we spend a lot of time talking to advisors because those are the people that are out there kind of facing the client, and that kind of makes sense. But we actually very rarely talk to kind of the paraplanners and kind of admin folk and customer support folk that are out there creating a whole bunch of documents and doing a whole lot of really hard work and really complicated work, which takes a great deal of time and skill. But we don't really talk directly to them that often. And so I'd love to today, like if there's an opportunity to sort of add some value to those people, I think it'd be a good opportunity to do it. So let's talk about the statement of advice. And maybe just more broadly on it, where do you think it's at in Australia, and where do you think it's going to be in 5 years' time? So I'll ask that question first, and then let's dive into your 5 tips or more tips.
Yeah, right. Well, again, like the rest of the industry, it's in a state of transformation, and we're seeing a lot of discussion around the digital SOA and how that's going to come about. The FPA is certainly championing that. I've spoken to Ben quite a bit about the direction that is taking, and trying to make sure that we're still hitting those compliance requirements whilst progressing, because we really do need to head down that track. From my point of view, that doesn't change content. And I think that's one of the things we've learnt in the digital transformation, is that you can have all the tech in the world, but you still need the content. So the advice content still has to be there, and it still has to be updated, and it still has to be correct. Even more so when you head into a digital world, because people are accessing it and expecting it to be up to date at that moment in time. So I definitely see it heading that way. The content will be very similar. It's just that clients will access it online or digitally or through an app. Or wouldn't it be great to see, a a client being able to log into an app and they can see their journey and all their accounts are linked into the same place. And that would be kind of cool. I don't think it's that far away.
No, not at all. And I think, we've got a really strong view in our company that, the world of, file-driven documents is ending and will end. And I think will potentially end faster than people think. And all documents will be shared via a link, and you'll access that document via the web browser as opposed to opening a file on your desktop. And,
that's right.
That I think for those of us that work in, document creation software systems and building those, that's relatively obvious. We're really excited about digitizing the SOA. We think it opens up a whole bunch of opportunities around how you present that content and how you present it in a more engaging way, and how you step a client through that document and what it means for them. We're really keen to be involved in that transition, and largely already are. So it's really nice to hear you say that, and completely agree. Cool. So what are your tips for writing a great SOA then? Bringing it back to the now, if you're talking to document creators today, what are your top tips for how to write a good one?
I thought about this and I thought I'm probably best to talk about the tips that aren't the obvious ones, like getting the strategy right and making sure that, we're doing those things that we all know we should do. So in the same vein as you were talking about how we can step the clients through the process, one of the top tips I have is remembering that the statement of advice is the client's financial journey. So I know we tend to look at it as a compliance document, but make sure when it's done that you take a step back and you have a look and think, okay, if the client's reading this, can they see where they are now? Can they see what they're wanting to achieve? And whether there's any limitations around that, how's the advice helping them achieve those goals? What steps do they actually need to take to implement it? And how are we going to help them along the way? So it's really that journey, that financial journey of the client that we want to come out of that document for them to read. I find that paraplanners in particular can get lost in the detail and they get too focused on the strategy and making sure that that's all right, and they forget to take that step back and look at the whole picture of the client.
Yeah, interesting.
So that's my my number one tip. The other one is making sure that if it is quite a complex set of strategies that we're recommending to a client, that we are putting something visual in there. And I know that you and I have worked with Lucidcharts. That's something that I used in my paraplanning business extensively with my team. You can actually share the charts with each other, so you're not recreating the wheel every time, but putting something visual in terms of the flow of funds. Again, don't talk about a strategy in isolation. Make sure you're showing where the money's coming from, how it's transitioning, what the impact on tax is. That type of information for myself, who's very visual, is really important to be adding in to the SOA. The other one is, which is my third tip, might raise some conversation. I know there's been conversation about this, which is we need templates. And I know that there has been discussion about not templating. But to me, that's like saying to a business, we don't think you should use automated systems and processes. So if you look at it like that and you take a step back and you think, okay, why do we put systems and processes in place? And templates is really that for the advice process. Well, we do it to create efficiencies and reduce costs, but we also do it to provide consistency to the client and make sure that we're reducing human error. So templates are really important in such a significant document that has a lot of information in it, as long as you customize, which is my next tip. So it's okay to use a template, and you should use a template so that it has all of the correct legislative references that you require, but you must customize it to the client. And that, to use an example, dollar cost averaging.
Yep.
Now, information, we can all get information on the internet now. Any customer can go and log into MoneySmart and find out what dollar cost averaging is and what the pros and cons of that strategy is. So the value in the advice is not what the strategy is. The value is how it relates to the client.
Yep.
And how that strategy is appropriate, for example, with dollar cost averaging in the current market. So talking about why it's appropriate for this client, why it works in a volatile market, and that type of information. So we don't, and I'm sure the regulators would agree, I'm going to put my neck out there, we don't mind templates as long as you're customizing it to the client. Yeah. Have you ever got a document where you've received dot point after dot point that you can just tell has come straight out of the template?
Yeah.
All it says to you is that they haven't cared enough to tailor this document to me as their customer. So I think that's probably one of the most important tips.
For sure.
Have I got one more?
Yeah.
I think so. So my number 5 was the tone of the SOA. And this is the lesson from my research in the UK versus the way we do things here. A lot of SOA templates out there that are being used have a legal tone to them.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that that's how we should be speaking to our clients. So we need to think about how we're communicating, not just as the advisor over the desk with their client, but in the written form as well, because how much do they retain of that appointment where they're sitting face to face? I'm sure there's statistics around that, but the one thing they have that they take away is that document. So thinking about how we communicate and the tone that we use is really important as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as human beings, we get so caught up in the kind of the day job, the task,
yes,
that we often forget about how we do it. And particularly, and this goes right across all sorts of situations, we very rarely actually think about the language that we use.
That's right.
And I'm such a big believer in like saying the right thing at the right time to someone can fundamentally kind of just change the trajectory. Yes. But also it's the words you choose to use. It's the way you say it that actually has a really big impact and completely changes someone's perception of a thing. So I completely agree with tone. Why do you think we've got to a point where they all sound so legal? I know that the obvious answer is they're all largely drafted by lawyers, but you know, why not a better balance between the legalese and the you know, the warmer tones of the actual conversation that I'm sure these advisors are having with their clients across the table?
Yeah, I think that it's just the way that it has evolved over time. So it's come from the regulators. We are heavily regulated. There's no doubt that we are. Australia has a culture of being very reportable to the public as well. So there's been that whole financial services industry, regulators being held accountable. So I think to some degree it's out of fear that it's come down that path, and the statement of advice templates have come out of the compliance teams to date. So I'm really trying to work with licensees on that and change that viewpoint. Absolutely, we need the compliance in there, but we need someone also looking at how it's written and the bigger picture as well.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, all businesses are going to, you know, look to protect themselves and to protect, you know, their staff and all that sort of thing, and make sure they communicate clearly in a way which is legally defensible. I think it's kind of to be expected. But I really do think there's room for adding, you know, slightly different structures to these documents, which make them more readable and more understandable to the client, which is kind of the purpose of them in the first place. It's to communicate information, and communicating effectively needs to be weighed against all those other requirements. And I think there are opportunities to add things like explainers, visuals, those sorts of things. I've never seen, actually, that I think about it, I've seen lots of statements of advice. I don't think I've ever seen one with like little explainer kind of paragraphs or little boxer explainers to say this thing means this.
Yeah.
I've
We have
never
moved
really
to that. So that's one of the
Yeah.
things that we've done in recent years. We've taken all the explanatory information and we put it into flyers. A lot of
Flyers
the
at the back.
templates
Yeah.
now have
Yeah.
the flyers. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you had that in a digital environment, you've got the same content, but you could have little pop-up
Yeah.
boxes and So
You could have a video.
oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
The video would be
Looking forward to seeing videos overlaid with the actual advisor who's just had the conversation with the client, overlaying themselves over a really kind of complex set of things to help the client remember what was actually said and how this thing that's written on the page, somewhat in legalese, actually relates back to that original conversation. I think that's going to be a really good tool. And again, digital documents, of which our company is a really kind of strong proponent of, and we're certainly heading that way, just generally across all industries. Digital documents will enable those sorts of things to occur far more easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Hey, Kate, they're such good tips. And I really, really am pleased again that we got the opportunity to speak to the paraplanners and speak to the document creators out there that are creating these complex documents for clients, and to hopefully add some value to them. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me.
Would love to do it again at some point. So we'll make sure that we share this out there. We'll make sure we let people know how they can find you if they've got other questions about anything you've said today, and hopefully we can continue to help all the good document creators out there in the industry. So thanks so much.
Good. Okay, thanks, Joel.